Sean's presentation is a great segue to my presentation. Work doesn't end with the field archaeology when it comes to Odyssey's involvement with deep ocean shipwrecks. Continuity is key. We not only maintain the best practice standards with our archaeology, but it also covers our conservation and documentation, all of our post-excavation work. This includes preservation and storage, photography, documentation and drawings, artifact research, analysis, and interpretation, which is all included in our proprietary database, which is called OASIS. Now, OASIS covers both the archaeological fieldwork, it covers the in situ, the recovery, and the post-excavation work, and it's all incorporated into this very extensive database, which is accessible internally, and that information is then disseminated externally via a number of different channels. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Publication and exhibits are a few to mention. Our commitment to excellence in conservation. Few people realize that Odyssey actually has a world-class conservation facility. Conservation begins well before the actual excavation. This is where the materials and the procedures are defined. We will not recover what we cannot properly conserve. So the initial conservation is immediate, and it actually happens on board ship. In this case, we actually have a French cannon from the Mediterranean. It dates to about the early 1700s. And you can see here the process from excavation to conservation. It's in a chemical solution. A few examples of actually what's taking place in our lab. Again, conservation, preservation is ongoing. We have here, actually, on your far right, we have the various containers that are including conservation of various artifacts and chemical solutions. We have a photographic facility, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also our database. Water samples are taken, salinity is tested. We have a microscope with the digital camera, which allows us to very in-depthly research the details on artifacts and then obviously document that. But the key to all of this is disseminating the information. Archaeology by the academics is not just for the academia. It must be made available to the broader public. And we do this through a variety of channels. Through our archaeological publications, our traveling exhibits, educational initiatives, public outreach programs, and, as Heidi mentioned, our online virtual museum. From 2005 to 2011, our exhibit was featured in 8 different science centers around the country, science centers and museums, and it captivated the attention of more than 1 million exhibit goers. It's interactive, it's graphic, and it's artifact-based. We also have a number of different smaller exhibits in the UK and elsewhere. When I mentioned graphic and interactive and artifact-based, one example being, Sean had mentioned our photo mosaic. Actually, the photo mosaics that we do for all of the sites that we survey. In the case of our exhibit, we have a large photo mosaic where visitors can actually hone in on one particular wreck site, the SS Republic, which is, about 600 meters deep. And they can actually learn about the artifacts and about the actual wreck site itself via this interactive program, which again is in the exhibit. Educational opportunities have abounded. Early on, when we first recovered the 1865 wreck of the SS Republic, teachers were contacting us. Our goal had always been to disseminate the information with the schools, with the educational systems. We found that the interest was great. We developed curriculum, standalone lessons, curriculum that would go hand in hand with the exhibit as well as outside of the exhibit, and project-based learning programs. Interdisciplinary programs which incorporated various subject matters which appeal very much to the teachers because they can interteach, their teaching becomes interconnected. The results have been astounding. One particular school of disadvantaged children, the teacher was having a lot of trouble with kids coming to school with their academics test scores, And after doing a year's worth of the Shipwrecked curriculum, their class attendance increased dramatically. Children who typically didn't go to school wearing their glasses were all of a sudden wearing their glasses because they wanted to be able to participate, and test scores improved. So I've talked about all the things that Odyssey undertakes as a commercial company: the search and excavation, the conservation and documentation, publication and exhibits. How do we fund all this? The costs are obviously enormous. Well, Odyssey has proposed a trade goods and cultural artifacts model. Good science and commerce can be compatible. So what defines a cultural artifact? It may be part of a ship elements, part of a ship that's reflective of ship elements and naval architecture, objects that are reflective of maritime life, personal effects of the crew and passengers, unique, one-of-a-kind artifacts. These artifacts, these cultural artifacts, remain in Odyssey's permanent collection, irrespective of monetary or aesthetic value. In this case, we have religious artifacts from the SS Republic. These are pressed glass crucifix candlesticks. Research has indicated that the company was the Boston and Sandwich Glass Works, based out of Massachusetts. The cargo was one distinct crate of both porcelains and glassware. These artifacts will forever remain in our permanent collection. But one-of-a-kind artifacts can also be relatively mundane artifacts, such as a leather shoe, or a bone toothbrush, which is now missing its 4 hair bristles. Or perhaps an artifact that really is quite unique. We have a seated Liberty silver $50 from the SS Republic with the inscribed words "War" in 1861 on the obverse, and then the initials EC on the reverse. Clearly, the artist who had inscribed this information, this was probably in relation to the American Civil War having just begun, based on the date of the shipwreck. A particularly exciting cultural artifact was a rare 17th century folding roll. This folding roll was discovered on a shipwreck on the western approaches to the English Channel. An exhibit was actually developed at Oxford University because this particular artifact is so incredibly rare. It is the earliest known example found on any shipwreck. It was an early form of pocket calculator used to measure areas and volumes of timber. And again, a paper was published subsequently with the research of a gentleman at Oxford whose expertise happens to be in this area. Trade goods, as opposed to cultural artifacts. These are mass-produced, duplicate, fungible, exchangeable items that are being transported as cargo. For example, with the SS Republic, again, the 1865 wreck. Over 8,000 glass and stoneware bottles were recovered from this wreck. Hundreds of redundant types. In this case, in the pictures here, we have a Drake's Plantation Bitters bottle. I believe we recovered something like 150 of these bottles. The location of every bottle was recorded. The entire archaeological operation was recorded, as Dr. Kingsley mentioned. Representative samples are retained in our permanent collection and then made available for exhibit and study by public and private institutions and/or individuals, qualified individuals. Artifacts are then considered for sale only after thorough research, documentation, photography, and study. And again, representative samples remain in our permanent collection. Another example of trade goods from the SS Republic. More than 51,000 American coins were recovered from this wreck. Again, the location of every coin recorded, every coin photographed and documented, fully quantified by mint, type, date. Further study revealed additional information regarding the mint marks and other various nuances. For example, the 10,000 seated Liberty silver $50 minted in New Orleans. Each and every one was studied. And from this study, it was discerned that there were 15 different dye marriages, the obverse and reverse. 15 different dye marriages occurred with these coins. This was new information, a new discovery from the numismatic world that they would not have known prior to this discovery and prior to the research that was undertaken. And again, this is just an example of the extent of site documentation that is actually done post-excavation. In this case, this is where the gold and silver coins were recovered in the stern of the wreck. Again, I mentioned 51,000 coins. There are over 4,000 gold issues, including $20 double eagles and $10 eagles, as well as over 47,000 silver issues, largely Seat Liberty silver half dollars. Again, the extent of research that we conduct. Here we actually have the pie charts that are demonstrating the relative quantities of gold that were actually produced in New Orleans, Three Mints, New Orleans, San Francisco, and in Philadelphia, and then the differentiation with the $10 double eagles. You can see New Orleans in the case of the $20 eagles, New Orleans and actually Philadelphia prevailed, and then with the $10 double eagles, Philadelphia and San Francisco. So this cultural artifacts trade goods model has opened up opportunities for public and private partnership opportunities, some of which Dr. Kingsley actually mentioned. The concept here is that Odyssey takes the upfront risk and funds the search, the excavation, and the conservation. If the project is successful, the government receives the cultural heritage artifacts, which I mentioned previously. The government can receive income from the project if it chooses to make the trade goods available for sale. That's the government's decision. Odyssey is either paid through the trade goods revenue or as a government contractor. Current agreements exist with the United Kingdom, and additional proposals are still under consideration with a number of other countries. The way of the future. We've demonstrated that modern technology has permitted us to conduct best standards in archaeology, best standards in conservation and documentation. Artifacts are really no longer irreversibly dispersed. When you've documented the entire wreck site, the artifact locational information and excavation is fully recorded via the photo mosaic, video documentation 24/7, all day. Whenever it's taking place, it's documented. High-resolution photographs. The in situ recovery and post-excavation history is maintained via our data logger, which is actually on the recovery vessel, and then it's incorporated into our conservation database, Oasis. When the artifacts, those few trade goods that are actually sold, the information about those goods is maintained in perpetuity. So basically, artifact provenience and provenance is maintained forever. This is just an example of the SS Republic, the site and artifact documentation. Again, all artifacts are documented and logged, irrespective of whether they're intended for sale or retention. The level of research and recording that is done has nothing to do whether it's a trade good or a cultural artifact. The same extensive work is done in entirety. Over 14,000 artifacts were recovered from the site, most of which have been researched and have been published, and information has been published about. And it's made available to the public. In this case, you can actually see the priority excavation areas, and they're all labeled, so you can actually see the anchor and the coal bunker, et cetera, et cetera. And again, this is the site plan of the SS Republic. And to the left, because we've distinguished the various artifact assemblages, to the left here you have navigational equipment, the bottles, and actually game pieces. These were dominoes. The navigational pieces would be categorized under cultural artifacts. Bottles, 8,000, different story. Those are trade goods. And again, the game pieces, smaller quantity, cultural artifacts because of their actual cultural definition. The Jacksonville Blue China wreck, Dr. Kingsley mentioned a little bit about, or actually quite a bit, about wrecks in the English Channel that have been extensively damaged by trawlers. Well, the Blue China wreck is in the Western Atlantic. Odyssey discovered the wreck en route to ultimately discovering the SS Republic. It saw that the trawler impacts were extensive. The largely ceramic cargo was hugely dispersed. Much of it was damaged. At that point, they decided to conduct a rescue archaeology mission. Basically to excavate and ultimately conserve as many of the artifacts that they could actually recover that were intact for further study and exhibit. This particular wreck had no treasure. It was not necessarily considered a significantly valuable wreck. However, historically and archaeologically speaking, it was very significant as a rare closed archaeological deposit, and I'm going very quickly now because I know I'm running out of time, which included British Staffordshire china, dipped wares, blue shell-edged wares, painted wares. And again, you can see on the lower left the trawler damage. I'm going to run through a few of these really quickly because I do want to get to my main point. Porcelain ginger jars. In addition to the British Staffordshire china, there were a few porcelain ginger jars among the few non-British ceramics recovered from the wreck site. Museum collections are in danger. Collections of artifacts in museums and libraries worldwide are at risk. The public funds for the acquisition and conservation, preservation, display, and storage of museum objects is increasingly restricted. And this information has actually been documented in a heritage preservation report. In sum, nearly 65% of these museums have already reported existing damage to their collections. Deaccessioning has actually become one solution. Deaccessioning is the sale of artifacts. And this is because there's so much at risk at this point. 13.5 million historical objects have been in need of immediate care. And few museums have the resources to assume large artifact collections. So when you have a wreck site, such as the Essex Republic, which yielded 51,000 gold and silver coins, I can safely assume that there are very few museums that would like to assume this large of a collection. Same for the bottles recovered from the site. In any event, one of the criteria for deaccessioning among museums, the deaccessioning of objects, has been they don't want multiple examples of the same or substantially similar items in their collection. It would be of no significance in terms of their historical research, and certainly they don't have the ability to care for these objects. The Odyssey approach. Odyssey's model is a viable approach. The funding and resources for shipwreck projects is limited. It's apparent the funding doesn't exist. Shipwrecks as an important underwater cultural heritage are at risk. They are becoming a diminishing historical record. Commercial ventures can be committed to and can perform with the highest archaeological and scientific standards. And the data can be published rapidly and the knowledge shared, as demonstrated by Odyssey's work, and it's shared with the broader public, not contained only within the archaeological community. In the final analysis, we really should all be united in our mission to save our cultural heritage. Thank you.